good evening to you all first, and a very warm welcome to Raisina Dialogue 2025. I'm very excited to be here with a very distinguished panel of experts who have, by the way, asked me to make this a very lively discussion for our very excited audience, hopefully. So I think the topic for our discussion is making money meet mitigation, green finance and nativist risks. And joining me on the panel, I'll briefly introduce my panelists. We have Mr. Engel Guria, who's the former Secretary General of the OECD. We have Mr. Amitabh Kant, G20 Sherpa India. We have Ornella Cucci, former Vice Minister of Environment and Tourism from Albania. We have Mr. Osamu Yamamoto, who's the CEO of Unison Capital Management from Japan. And finally, we have Yasmin Mozenia from Sequoia Climate Foundation, to be clear, who's the program director for the climate finance. So welcome to you all. On the floor of the session, this is about a 15-minute panel discussion, and the last 15 to 20 minutes have been reserved for a Q&A. So I hope you have your questions ready. And I'm going to get right at it in the interest of time. But before I do that, I want to just set the context very briefly so we can really go beyond what is already known and look at solutions on climate finance and green finance and the nativist risks that have really been influencing the problem at hand. I would want to look at this subject from basically three prongs, which is finance, technology, and geopolitics. On finance specifically, I want to start maybe on a very optimistic note. So 2024 was actually a great year for green finance because it was the first time that the green finance investments actually surpassed fossil fuel investments. So that's some great news. But the problem and the challenge is, A, majority of these investments happened in advanced economies, with only about 15% taking place in the emerging markets and developing countries outside China. The second, that the most of these investments were in emerging economies from public sources. So majority of them were from governments and state-owned enterprises, vis-a-vis an advanced economy where that proportion is just 15%. So there is also not just a geographical disparity, but also disparity in the sense of the sources of funding. And one of the primary reasons for that is a sense of, an unbiased currency risk that is often placed on developing economies. The countries in emerging world borrow in US currency, and, mounting debt is a significant problem when we look at it. And the credit rating agencies till date follow very antiquated methodologies which have failed to really adapt to the changing realities in emerging economies. So looking at it from that perspective, I think it's important to address some of these financial challenges, which I hope our panel would in the next few rounds. The second challenge apart from finance is, of course, the problem of technology. Now, I think there is broadly a roadmap that has been identified for energy decarbonization. We start with energy efficiency to electrification of electricity and end-use processes, going on to looking at carbon capture and removal, which is for economies. But there are still certain technologies that don't exist when we look at trucking, when we look at aviation, shipping, and hard-to-abate processes and hard-to-abate sectors. The challenge is of non-scalable and commercial technologies. So that is, again, a big prominent challenge that I would want our panel to address here. And thirdly, and I think this is where it gets very interesting, which is the problem of geopolitics. I think, alluding to the title, the nativist risks that, we want to talk about, which includes the CBAM, to the IRA, to the tech and the trade wars. So there are a lot of geopolitical considerations. I mean, this year has actually been a bit of a whirlwind geopolitically, given the rise of, industrial policies. So I think that is some of the bits that we want to cover, apart from, of course, the weaponization of existing supply chains. So I think I'd like to start with you first, Mr. Engel Guria. So just to put a stat out there, you've been with the OECD, and majority of the investments that happen in the OECD countries, about 80% of the climate finance investments mobilized from OECD countries, take place and are invested back in OECD countries. So, what would be your suggestion and your experience with the OECD that multilateral institutions can do to be able to funnel and channel more investments into emerging economies? Yes.
My concern is that the single most important intergenerational responsibility that we have today is with the planet, and that we have forgotten about it because of Ukraine, because of the Middle East, because of Sudan and some other hotspots in Africa. We have forgotten about climate change as the single most important intergenerational responsibility that we have. And we should get back to it. And we have to deal with Ukraine, we have to deal with the Middle East, we have to deal with Sudan, etc. But we have to continue addressing the question of climate change. Otherwise, we will lose the planet, and it's the only one we've got. So this is number one. Number two, I believe that the modalities are perhaps less important, because let bankers be bankers. You know, they have the greatest creativity, and they implement all sorts of green bonds and you know, the perfection, and they work very well, and they trade very well, and they have trade in the secondary markets, etc., etc. So let that be done, and let's have the bankers take care of that. But there is something that cannot be substituted, which is the political will. And I would say that Mr. Kant, in particular, because he is the Sherpa of the G20. And remember that the last developing country will be this year's G20. After that, follow, guess who? The United States. So guess what type of G20 the United States will have? So I believe that this year is quite crucial, quite important. And that following Indonesia, and following India, and following Brazil, now South Africa, of course, it will be crucial to have a very, very good round of the G20. Now, let me just finish with a comment. Our moderator was celebrating that we have finally achieved 100 billion. That means the finance needed to help developing countries help themselves with the compliance of the climate change changes, and the climate change of COP the COP 2015 in Paris. But the fact that the United States has left the Paris Agreement has already weakened both the countries and the companies, which are the ones who produce most of the emissions, the companies. And they have weakened their desire to comply. And Mr. Trump and his colleagues are making it easier for them. And they're making it easier for the whole of the world. So we are in front of a very, very serious problem of climate change and climate action. And therefore, the question of the finance is crucial, but the willingness is probably even more important.
Thank you so much. I think I take two really important bits from your comments, which is one, let bankers be bankers. And the second, of course, the political will point that you make. And I think that brings me to you, Mr. Kant, and I will rely on you to make this really fun, as you have promised us. Well, both of you in that case. So I think, would you like the mic? Okay. So I think I have two questions for you, both on the bankers bit and the political will. I think I'll start with the political will argument. India had a very successful G20 presidency, particularly its push for financial system reforms were very well appreciated. We had the Triple Agenda Report commissioned under the Indian G20 presidency, which was chaired by Mr. N.K. Singh and Professor Larry Summers. And they did make some very practical and ambitious, they really laid out a very ambitious roadmap on that. So my question is that what are your expectations from the South African presidency and more interestingly from the American presidency on advancing the agenda of financial reform?
Well, let me first say that important to put this in a perspective because my commitments from South African presidency are a function of the global leadership. It's important to understand that 84% of the carbon space has already been occupied by the developed countries. They continue to go back to fossil fuel. They will occupy another 5% of the carbon space in the next 3 to 4 years, leaving virtually nothing for the global south and the developing countries. In 2009, they had committed to $100 billion a year, which they never lived up to. The OECD report saying that they've made $100 billion is a complete greenwashing of that report. They've taken even projects for coal, which have been financed by developed part of the world as a part of the financing. So it's that OECD reports need to be thrown into the dustbin, according to me. Number 3 is the geopolitics that you're asking for. Because last time the United States backed out, it made it very complex. This time again, the United States has walked out. But the important thing is that 1% of the companies in the world today account for about 44% of the greenhouse gas emission. 1% of the companies. These are fossil fuel companies which finance election across Europe and across United States. And these companies are never penalized. So you need the markets to penalize them. You need their record on the carbon emission being tracked, much like countries are rated. These companies need to be rated and their performance in terms of greenhouse gas emission put in public domain so that citizens do not buy their stocks and they are punished. Unless that doesn't happen, you will see the ups and downs of the fossil fuel politics. Now, countries like India have moved forward because of their own political will. In India, the Prime Minister took this leadership position that we will, irrespective of what the West does, we will move forward. And we've done 200 gigawatt of renewable energy. We will do 500 gigawatt of renewable energy by 2030. We're the only G20 country which has crossed its COP21 targets 9 years ahead of schedule. And our objective is that by 2047, by the time we become 100, we would have used renewable to crack water, produce green hydrogen. Today, we import 180 billion worth of fossil fuel. Our target is that by 2047, we should be an exporter of green hydrogen and clean energy to the rest of the world because we are climatically blessed. And therefore, many countries in the global south will have to push for their own green agenda, despite the fact that the developed part of the world historically needs to pay for all the crimes that it has committed in the post-industrial era. Both Europe and America have actually occupied all the space, left nothing for the global south. And it's important to highlight some of this because without financing in the long-term financing being made available, it'll be very difficult for the global south to be able to achieve its targets because, today finance is available at 2% interest in the United States and Europe. It's available at 8% to some emerging markets. It's available at 16% to Africa. It's available at 24% to some of the sub-Saharan countries. Now, at that rate of interest, you can't have green financing at all. And therefore, countries which have occupied all the space in the world need to compensate for all the space that they have occupied. Otherwise, the global south will suffer. The 5 billion people of the global south will be suffering on because of the developed part of the world.
Thank you, Mr. Kant. I do have a follow-up for you, actually. I want to, yes, the US is withdrawn from the Paris Agreement, but we also have countries like Indonesia who, after US withdrawal, actually questioned their own decarbonization given the, hypocrisy and the historical non-accountability of the West. So do you still believe that platforms like the G20 will be successful in pushing for the green and climate agenda? Or do you think minilaterals like the IMEC, like the I2U2, like the Quad, or perhaps the bilateral, trilateral, quadrilateral agreements among countries will be the way forward, particularly from a South-South partnership perspective as well, to push for green finance and climate action?
So, what's making it very difficult is because the target for 1.5 degrees centigrade, which was committed to at COP21, had clear timelines. And last year was the hottest year in the history of the world. We breached 1.5 degrees centigrade already. And Europe is saying that we will move away from fossil fuel not in 2030, but by 2035 now. They have gone back to fossil fuel. Each one of the European countries, Germany, France, Italy, they've gone back to fossil fuel. Now, what about their commitments to COP21? How do you expect G20 and a global south country like South Africa to deliver when the developed part of the world is backing out, the United States is backing out, Germany is backing out, Italy is backing out, France is backing out after having consumed 84% of the carbon space in the world? Is that responsibility? I mean, they are not living up to the commitments they've made. And you are expecting a global south country like South Africa to achieve? How is it possible? These countries which have occupied all the carbon space in the world historically must be held to account.
I agree. Thank you for your very passionate answer. We appreciate that. Yes. So I think that brings me to you, Ornella. You've been part of the Global Environment Facility. And I think, alluding to what Mr. Khan said about how different countries across the globe pay different interest rates, there are different premiums allotted and decided upon based on what part of the world they come from, which not always reflect the most accurate currency risk, but there are certainly certain biases in methodological frameworks, in credit rating agency frameworks that have biased, that have penalized countries from the global south. In your opinion, given your experience with the GEF, how can smaller countries really overcome these challenges, particularly when it comes to currency risk? And what are some of the solutions that you would like to maybe put forward for smaller economies and to be able to attract and channelize greater green finance?
Oh, thank you. And thank you very much, ORF, for organizing such a very big and good event and having us here. Thank you for this. So, I'm Morila Tucci and I'm coming from Albania. Albania is a small country in Balkans. Geographically, we are Europe, but we are not part of Europe. And as country, we are the most attacked country from climate change in all Europe. And we are producing 0% CO2 from the production of energy, and we are the country that we are producing less gas emissions in all Europe. So it's not just global south, it's everywhere in undeveloped countries. And I have been part of, as board member of the Green Climate Fund and also Global Environmental Facilities, which are the biggest funds globally for the environment and the climate change. So what is happening? And I will start from COP. So we organized already 29 COPs every year. And what we are producing with this, except pollution, because there are a lot of people going every year, having their speeches there, going back to their countries. And I will tell you a joke, which is not a joke, it's reality. Some years ago, one of our prime ministers went to COP and said that we will have less 45% of the total gas emissions in our country. And so we don't have industries at all. We are just developing tourism sector in our country, and we are producing 100% renewable energy, hydropowers. So in this case, when he came back, the whole country said to him that he will send us to the stone area, because what we will do with for having this 45%. And why was the 45%? Because it was a trendy in COP. It was a trendy, let's say, objective for all the countries, or for all the small countries, having these objectives like 45%. And even our prime minister said 45%. And when he came back, like all the prime ministers are doing, they reflected 0% of their annual budget for climate change in our country. And this is happening in every COP and in every small country. So we are going to COP, we are saying our permissions, we are going a lot of people, taking our dimes there, having a lot of pollution, because yes, it's a big population going in every COP, and just coming back with nothing. And I don't know, having 10
Sorry.
years
Just
working for COP, why we are organizing every year a COP. Secondly, I will go to the role of the Green Climate Fund and every kind of funds, and it's the biggest one fund. So in small countries like mine, we don't have the capacities for writing our own projects, for sending our own projects to be financed in the Green Climate Fund. By the other hand, in every fund, in every global fund, Adaptation Fund, Green Climate Fund, JEF even, there are a lot of bureaucracies, more than Europe is producing bureaucracy. They are producing the funds for climate finance. So in this case, for one project, we needed 10 years. And it was a small one, 50 millions for
why is
climate
that?
change. Because Green Climate Fund has a lot of bureaucracy for approving. And they are going back and forth with comments. And so in 10 years, the whole reality is changing, and so you have to rewrite your project. And probably some of you, it's working with GCF, and you probably know how important it is to be accredited for accelerating these funds. It's from 5 to 15 years for being a delivery partner, a local partner in Green Climate Fund. So the bureaucracy is big, the funds are small. And so
I'm
yes.
going to butt in there because I have just alluding to that point of yours. we have plenty of funds today, right? We have the adaptation fund, the L&D fund, we have the GCF. There's so much out there. Do you feel like maybe that's in a way done on purpose to be able to take away the attention from the real problem at hand? There is a certain, narrative and a proposition that was made to really perhaps set up a green bank, which really pulls in all these resources and funds and is a more efficient, monolithic function than having multiple little funds that are not perhaps the most efficient way to go.
I will be more practical to explain this with our case, Albanian case. So we don't have the capacities, as I said, the human capacities for this. So we are using, for example, German reality for Albanian reality. Expertise for Albanian reality. US expertise for Albanian reality. They are coming, the experts in our countries, they are working for our projects, they are leaving the country, and nothing will happen. And we are just opening and closing some cycles of projects without nothing resting in our own countries, because we are small countries. We don't need this. We don't need just to accelerate some small funds, because the whole expertise is going abroad to the US or other developed countries' experts. So what we are exactly doing in our small countries. And finance, it's not just the part of this solution. It's the solution. Without money, without moving money, we can't move green transition. So in this case, yes, we need capacities. Yes, we need to be concrete. Yes, we need to understand how much important is climate change. And lastly, I will talk about politics. And we are seeing, for example, that now politics, it's not just climate denialism. It isn't just alive. It's winning elections everywhere. Sweden, US, going and coming from Paris Agreement. And what about us? What we will do with this? Who created this pollution from 900? So
thank you. I think, yes, finance is the only solution. I hear you there. And I think that brings us to the person onto whom all our hopes are pinned, the rainmaker and the private sector representative on our panel, Mr. Osamu Yamamoto. So I think my question to you really is, how do you think investors are really perceiving this rising nationalism and protectionism among countries around the world? So how does that impact your investor framework or decision making analysis? And I have a follow up for you, but I'm going to allow you to answer that first.
Short answer is not much, and let me tell you why. Global North is about asset owners. That's a view, one view you can take. And asset owners means your pensions. Whether it's public or private, it doesn't matter. It's a pension. And your lifetime saving. And Global North, in the case of Japan, we have $4 trillion of asset under management in the public and the private pension. So to somebody's point, you have to mobilize this. That's point number one, to attack this, all those things that the excellencies are making here. It's clearly climate change is an issue, and it's an existential issue. Everybody understand that point. But how to mobilize this asset owners AUM is the agenda. Then your question is, all those things affecting their state of mind or their way of making decisions? Not much, because they have a fiduciary duty. Okay, and so they have to think about all those factors in. But at the end of the day, their fiduciary duty is to you, your pension. That's a dilemma. So as a human being, they know 100% about those points that the excellencies are talking about, but they themselves don't have an answer how to mobilize these things. And let me jump on to that because of the, I'll be brief on the solution part, okay? The key is cost of capital. Your pension has a lowest cost of capital ever. Global North pension. Okay, they are expecting just a 5% or 6% under the inflation circumstances like this, but they are expecting 7% per annum. Okay, that's the cost of capital. Before that, it was like a 4.5%. Okay, so you have to mobilize their capital from that perspective. How? How is the key here is investment value chain. Everybody's talking about the supply chain. Supply chain is for the FDI, foreign direct investment. I'm talking about the foreign portfolio investment, FPI. And FPI and FDI is totally different thing. You have to make a clear distinction between the two. FPI, we call this investment value chain. Asset owner, asset manager, then the portfolio company or projects. Simple, isn't it? But this is something you don't have for the climate change side. So that's why you guys you talked about a lot of funds, etc., etc. And in your opening statement, you said 50% or more is coming only from public sector. Of course, because there's no investment value chain. So the key is cost of capital and a profit motivation. And a profit motivation to whom? It's asset managers. That's us. That's us. So we have to make, it is our responsibility to come up with some good idea, investable idea, okay, for the asset owners who has a fiduciary duty, okay? And then, profit motivation is very clear because you heard about the words like IRR or expected return, right, of Indian, let's say, renewable project. India already has a 20 gigawatts renewable project. When I talk about this in the United States about 2 weeks ago, they were like, wow, 20 gigawatts, what is this? Okay, India already has a scale. And what is IRR for that? US dollar term, maybe 12 to 15% per annum. So the spread of that is very big. That's profit for the asset manager like us. So getting back to your point, okay, not much, but that behind that simple answer, there's this notion of a investment value chain and profit motivation, and thank God, there's a split. So I'm very optimistic about this, coming years, next 5 years, 10 years. There will be lots of new investable idea in the climate change space, and I'm sure we are going to solve this issue.
Yes.
Back to you.
Thank you. But just a really quick follow-up to that. So you said that some countries have a 15% ROI versus some have about 7 to 8. Now, a lot of emerging economies don't have a high, rate of return. So how do they really compete with advanced economies to mobilize the capital, which is, the point you're making?
So your point is about the currency fluctuation, etc. On the
Correct.
US dollar term, smaller countries have a disadvantage. Let's face it, it's true. But let's solve the issue first at India. Okay, India is not a small country, and India's INR-based return is actually higher than the US dollar-based return these days. So if you can solve the issue here, that will have a very strong, the effect spilling over to the smaller nations. Okay, and there's no magic there. Okay, and you cannot skip India. So let's say this is a market you have to fight right now, and this is a market you have to find a solution. That in strong belief that there will be a spillover effect.
Right. Mr. Kant, I think you wanted to say something.
Some very important points has been made by my colleague from JBIC, and I think it's important to understand why India could attract private capital into the renewable energy sector. It was possible because, firstly, you need a set of policies to be able to attract finance into the country and in the private sector. So first and foremost, India is the only country which has one grid across its length and breadth. The Europe doesn't have one grid. United States doesn't have one grid. You can be producing renewable in the southern part of the country, you can transfer it to the eastern part of the country. There's one grid. The second thing India did was that it created a policy environment where it created a relationship between the state governments, which run the DISCOM, the central government, and the Reserve Bank of India. And they said that if a private sector is producing renewable, it will be bought by a central agency called SECI. But the payment has to come from the DISCOM, and if the payment does not come from the DISCOM, the money will be deducted by the central our bank, Reserve Bank of India, from the amounts which have to go to the state government. So an escrow mechanism was created through a tripartite agreement between the state, the center, and the Reserve Bank of India. That made the projects commercially viable, and that enabled private sector to put renewable projects, attract private funds, attract private equity, attract a lot of private investment flows. And without your ability to attract private funding from across the world, it'll be impossible to drive the green agenda in the future. The point being made is very important. That is, private money must start flowing in for climate action. India was able to do it through a series of policies and setting the agenda that we are going to create 500 gigawatt of renewable energy, and setting the agenda that we are going to bring down the cost of green hydrogen to $1 per kilogram. Today it is $4.50. When we started renewable, the rate for renewable was 24 rupees per unit. We brought it down to 2 rupees a unit through size and scale. Green hydrogen is $4.50 in India. In United States, it's $7. We've said that we'll bring it down to $1 by 2030 through size and scale. But it requires a series of policies to ensure that the private sector money is safeguarded and that they are able to create a profit. Without that, it will not work.
Absolutely. And I think policy signaling is so crucial to be able to attract foreign capital. But I think coming to that point as well, in India now we have a very strange dichotomy, right? Because of a very strong climate energy focused policy signaling, the banks are investing less in fossil fuels. However, we also at the same time don't have the scale of clean green finance that we need for the energy transition. So we're not investing in fossil fuels. We don't have the clean energy scale that we're looking at. Energy security becomes a big challenge. So how do you think we're going to address that?
See, the important point for any country is to reach a point where you make your renewable energy cheaper than the fossil fuel. You can't say that I'm not going to do fossil fuel. You say that, you will have a chaos, your elected government will lose power. It's not possible politically. Not possible politically. But through policies, if you make renewable energy cheaper than the fossil fuel, as India has done, then people will invest in renewable rather than the fossil fuel. And that is the route to take. Take a series of policy initiatives, take policy, technology, finance are all critical to drive down rates of renewable energy. India, through size and scale, has been able to do this because India has used the size and scale of India to drive down prices.
No, I think I agree with you. And I'm going to quickly, in the interest of time, move to you, Yasmin. In the United States, the US foreign aid cuts have been big news all over the world. And there is a certain discourse and debate and a certain narrative which says that the philanthropy and the philanthropic sector will really pitch in and help fill that gap. So what are your thoughts on that? And I think also really talking about Mr. Kant's point around and speaking to that on guarantees, right? How central government really puts out that guarantee for private capital flowing into the countries. How do you think philanthropy can really provide that guarantee as well, perhaps to private capital to invest in emerging economies? So what are your thoughts on that?
No. Look, I'm standing in between this panel and getting questions from the people who actually showed up to this session, which I really love. I'd love to get those. So I'm going to be very fast. I'm glad that I came last on this panel. So we've had all of the finance solutions already discussed, the real ones, which are around policy enabling, signaling, investment, and Mr. Khan's point about driving down, investment and deployment, driving down the cost, and really the answer here being to make one form of energy more efficient than another, to meet the private sector's hurdle rates. There's nothing to see here with philanthropy, is what I think I want the message to be. So we had a discussion over dinner, in particular around USAID and how much of that finance was really going towards energy and renewable kind of growth anyway. Let's not sort of get deeply into that rabbit hole. But look, the size and scale of philanthropy, which anyway is not as stable as a form of taxpayer-raised funds, is nowhere near the scale of the size of the transition that we need for finance. So the only way that it becomes relevant is to try to make leveraged plays, not in Yamamoto-san's world, financial leverage, but in terms of scale, systems impact, changing the way policymakers think or do things, and changing the way consumers think or do things. We have one of the biggest climate finance advocates in the world, now in charge of it, fossil fuel driven G7 country. For those who aren't following Canadian politics, which I don't blame you for, it's Mark Carney in Canada. So you're seeing some leverage kind of plays like that coming through that have been philanthropically backed. You've seen agile kind of time constrained interventions, whether it was Bloomberg coming in to pay for America's pulling out of the Paris Agreement and kind of the UN related costs, or you're seeing on the other side a ton of money coming out from, I don't know if anybody followed the story about the Gates Foundation on Climate, who's decided that actually policy isn't going to be the way he wants to deploy his philanthropic funding. On philanthropy, he'll focus on health, where he thinks he can leverage the most what that foundation has done. But instead, he still has a massive investment arm and operation on the clean energy side. So you've got different ways that philanthropy can think about sort of time constrained, agile, in and out. At the end of the day, philanthropy is here for the public good provision. And for sure, we're not here to make a financial return. And so you can't think about philanthropic capital in the same way as the other pools that we've talked about today. But I can get a lot more into this. I want to stop because I think we should let.
Thank you.
people come in.
We're going to go to the questions and maybe you can respond. I'm sorry, we're going to go to the questions, please. Okay, so we're going to maybe take about 3 to 4 questions, and I'll request you to just stick to questions and no comments and statements, please, and introduce yourself with your name. Yes, so can we get the mics, Aditya, please?
Hello, thank you very much for the panel, very interesting. I'm Christopher Alcuri, I work in Intesa Sanpaolo Bank. Intesa Sanpaolo, my focus is on circular economy. So I believe in everything you said. I really believe that finance has a big role to do. But even from this panel itself, we realize that it's not the only instrument that can really enable all the transition, right? Directly, we emerged into policy that is needed to set the framework and the common ground to start, to incentivize projects and to set a common field of competitivity for example, renewable energy. Even though I don't believe personally that renewable energy has to be only the central core of our discussion, right? I believe there is a lot that companies, that people also can do through their corporates, through their businesses, and through their own citizen engagement that they can change. Because we're always thinking about renewable energy as core, and it's true, it's the big part of it. But there is also so much about how we produce and how we consume products, right? And I believe there also corporates and business. Yeah, I will answer the question.
Please.
Yeah.
No, you'll have to be quick.
Businesses need to do so much. Anyway, in order to allow finance to invest and to finance these businesses and these initiatives, I believe there is so much regulators have to do and can do in terms of power of including risks of being unsustainable. So what we call usually linear risks, right? Risks of continuing the way we are proceeding in fossil fuel or in producing the products we are doing. And my question for you, where are we from this? How much regulators can do, and what should they do in order to include these linear risks inside the framework of credit risk assessment in order to make for capital, to enable capital
Thank you.
movement
We'll take
towards
the
finance?
next question, please.
thank
We'll
you.
take a bunch of them and we'll get to the answers at the end.
My name is
Yeah.
Wahid from Amali Asset Management. I heard a lot of the speakers say there is lack of funding, but it's strange because when we're looking at the ecosystem, we see banks like Nativist, for example, our friends over there at HSBC. Nativist has some very interesting products out there. HSBC is now vertically integrated with a great asset management arm that is just pushing out a lot of carbon credits to their client base. You have Standard Chartered Bank that just acquired an exchange to ease the liquidity of the carbon credit pools that they have. So our banker friends are being very innovative. On the private equity side, I personally know of 2 investment managers that lost their jobs and had to switch because they couldn't allocate and disperse capital, right? So the biggest challenge right now is investment readiness, right? There are asset managers that are incentivized because they do build investment cases for 20 to 25% net IRR, right? So that is a possibility. But the biggest challenge right now is philanthropic funding to get a lot of these projects to investment readiness stage, right? That's the challenge that we are foreseeing. So with USAID right now, for lack of better words, being dismantled, how do you see new players emerging in this space to fill the vacuum, especially with a lot of governments facing the pressure of the lack of funding trickling down to these communities, which creates instability, extremism, etc. Thank you.
Okay, we'll take maybe really quickly 2 more. Yes, the lady. Yeah, maybe those 2.
So my question is more on the framework and pledges. As India hasn't signed the JETP as well as the Global Methane Pledge. How do you see India signing this to be ensuring that we reach the 2070 goal? The second one is, sir, you have led various campaigns like Incredible India and all. How do we ensure that we have a more community citizen climate narrative? And how do we ensure that the bureaucrats are able to not have those funding gaps when they are implementing climate action plans in their districts and all? Thank you.
And can we maybe take one last question for the lady there? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Els. I work for an NGO on maritime decarbonisation. But I wanted to ask about, we heard a lot from you guys about more money, but I'm also interested in, how finance is deployed and actually if you have any reflections on how that can be improved, particularly in the Global South with the Global South.
Thank you. Yes, of course. So I think we're going to go to each one of our panelists to respond to the questions, and this will also serve as your closing remarks. So I'll request you to respond to the questions, but also summarize your thoughts from the discussion today. And we'll maybe please start with you.
So why we are talking about energy? Because 73% of the pollution of gas emissions is coming from energy globally. And for this, we are talking about energy. Why we are talking about fossil fuels? Because for coal from 2008, it's more expensive and it can be used like 20 years ago. So in this nowadays, coal production of energy and nuclear production of energy, it's the same price. But nuclear production of energy, it's sustainability because it's not producing gas emissions. So what we will use? The cheapest one, it's the wind production of energy and the solar production of energy. But what we need for this, we need to have this kind of finances. And the climate finance is not charity. It's let's say it's polluter pays slogan. It's working globally. Which countries are polluting the system, they have to pay for the system. This is not charity for our countries. They have to pay and they have to be part of Paris Agreement for this, for helping us to be more productive and to helping us to develop our countries without contributing more to CO2 production. Thank you.
Yasmin.
Thanks. I have a quick comment on Intez's question about regulation. I mean, I think financial regulation went out way above beyond its skis, starting from the late 2010s into the early 2020s. In fact, you're seeing a huge deregulatory push / simplification of regulation because one could argue that it's gotten overburdensome and overcomplicated to comply with. But certainly this agenda is probably the most evolved from the public policy sector in terms of supporting the green transition, at least in the developed economies, by which I mean G7, but kind of expanding out to OECD. So I don't think you're going to see that much news there in the coming years, but other sectors of policy need to catch up with it. And on the second question around philanthropic capital being needed to seed fund sort of projects for investability, I just want to draw a line between philanthropic capital and development finance capital. One of those is private, and much smaller. The second one is taxpayer funded and connected to national interest as well as national strategy. And I think, I think that the way one thinks about doing development finance has been changing significantly. Last year, we heard from Yamamoto-san's colleagues from JBIC in Japan. You have corporations like that, the Development Finance Corporation in the US, you have the British International Investment in the UK, JBIC in Japan, that look at foreign development projects, basically, that are really acting, I think, quite effectively in this space. And my personal view is that you'll see more action from those kind of national development banks and also foreign development banks that are based in major economies growing in order to support this kind of activity. But it's not philanthropic, right? It's not, if we're going to rely on the smallest pool of funding, which is charitable in whatever sense of the word, you're never going to get to the scale that we need. And that's why the conversation is consistently about creating the right financial incentives, bringing down the cost of capital, bringing down the cost of deployment, and looking at scale and other kind of mechanisms, public financing, fiscal financing through R&D. And it kind of speaks to your observation around the fiscal space tightening everywhere. The kind of finance that feels less there for a return or for profit is going to just be squeezed. We haven't just seen it in the US. The UK just swapped ODA funding for defense spending, and I think we're going to see that trend happening across the rest of the world. So the answer will just keep coming back to finding ways to really incentivize the free market to come in and provide the solutions.
Mr. Kant?
So this question about community participation is an important one. I don't think you can achieve energy transition without community support. When we did the G20, we had a very ambitious Green Development Pact, which talked about tripling of renewable energy and doubling of energy efficiency, and very, very ambitious agenda on biofuels, etc. It could be possible because we held G20 in every part of India. We took the community along. And to my mind, it's very, very critical that community becomes a very integral part of it, because eventually you're making a difference to the lives of the citizens by moving from fossil to cleaner forms of energy. That's very important. And it's incumbent upon political leadership to make citizens a part of this movement. The second was about project financing, and this the question asked here. Let me say that in some ways that you need very sophisticated level of project development. That's why I raised the issue of policies, I raised the issue of technology, because you need to de-risk projects. Private capital will never come in if there are risks. You need to de-risk completely, and de-risking means that a very high level of sophisticated project development is done, land is acquired, purchase agreements are signed, equity capital is brought in, or without all that, complete de-risking of who the buyer will be, how the power renewable will flow through the grid, whether the private sector investment is safe and sound. Without that, you will never be able to attract private capital. And that, to my mind, is very critical. And the more sophisticated the project development, you'll be able to attract funds at lower and lower interest rates. And that is the key to success in any emerging market. High level of project development, de-risking it completely, and then putting it out into the market so as to able to attract funds and private capital in at low rates of interest.
Thank you. Just to add to the circular economy bit, I think the whole LIFE program and circular economy were a very important part of the G20.
No, someone
presidency as
raised
well.
this issue of circular economy.
Yeah.
One is that, the developed part of the world has believed in overconsumption. They put on taps, they never switch off lights. You go to New York, all lights are on 24/7. And you go there, cars will never switch off engines when you have red lights. So they have survived on overconsumption at the cost of global south. And to my mind, it's not governments which will make a difference, as our Prime Minister says. It's the citizens who will make a difference. And therefore, every citizen must become a responsible citizen and a pro-planet person. And only when lifestyle for sustainability is built in will we be able to transform the world.
Thank you, Mr. Guria. Your final thoughts and comments, please.
Well, first of all, let me thank the Club de Madrid for having sponsored me for being here. Let me just criticize your enthusiasm because, again, you said we had already reached the summit because we got to 100 billion. Now, what they're telling us is that we need 300 billion or 340 billion to be precise. So we need 3 times as much as we took for almost 10 years, since 2015 to 2024, to get there. Huh? So, and we need 1.3 billion for 1.3 trillion for the next 4 years to 2030. So that means 340 billion per year. That means we are way, way behind the curve. Now, when you talk about regulators, it's not a regulatory problem today. Regulators have allowed for green bonds, for sustainability-linked finance, for debt for climate swaps. That they did that 25 years ago, with the Mexico debt renegotiation and with the Costa Rica debt renegotiation. Innovative risk-sharing mechanisms, expanding local financing platforms, implementing carbon pricing mechanisms. How long have we had carbon pricing instruments? A long time ago, except the markets don't work because there were too many permits issued. So if you have too many permits issued, then you flood the market and you bring down the price. But it was a nature-based solution. There's a lot of, but listen, you can get to 200 billion simply by increasing the leverage of multilateral organizations. The World Bank and the African Development Bank and the Asian Development Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank and the CAF, etc. By simply allowing them to do what the private banks do, which is to leverage their capital not 20 times, but perhaps maybe 10 times, because they're not allowed today to leverage their capital. So you could get the difference between the 100 billion and the 300 billion that you need altogether simply from increasing the leverage of these organizations. Of course, if you increase the capital of these organizations, that would also do very well. But let's say a combination of increasing the capital plus increasing the leverage could do the trick. So we're not short of the money. For those of you who said, there isn't enough money, there's a lack of funding, etc. It's not because of lack of funding. It's because the institutions that are in charge of getting the money there are not sufficiently well leveraged and are not sufficiently well capitalized. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think just to respond to your initial remark, I think my enthusiasm stems from the fact that, clean energy investments surpass fossil fuel investments. There were $3 trillion of investment that happened in the energy sector in 2024. And of that, $2 trillion were actually in clean energy. But anyway, I think I'm going to lastly move on to you, Mr. Yamamoto, for your final remarks.
But sorry, mostly you said it was happening in developed countries.
That is true, actually.
Yes, and this
true.
is the problem. It was happening at the OECD mostly. And this is the problem because it's not happening where it should be happening, which is in the developing countries.
Absolutely. I think I'm glad we agree there. Finally, on your thoughts.
Well, thank you very much. First of all, thank you, Oraya, to having this very exciting panel. And let me, as a closing thought, let me respond to my question from my colleagues from Brazil, which is about linear risk and circularity. If you give me 50 minutes, I can explain why India has the best policy package to promote circularity. And that discussion, pretty much the same discussion that the Excellency made about the renewable side. So yes, I concur with you, sir. You have an excellent policy package to promote the circularity in India, and you have an excellent, basic framework to promote the investment, private sector investment into that sector, and you have an excellent mechanism to de-risk the projects. The biggest gap is nobody knows. Okay, that's the key. And there's a huge information asymmetry in this field. So India has to promote this policy package, de-risking mechanism, incentive mechanism for the private sector to come. And you do have a lot of issues, central government versus local. But for the case of a renewable, you already, passed that thing. You talked about SECI, etc. So to answer your question, I don't know nothing about Brazil's situation. You're from Italy. Sorry. I thought you were from Brazil. Okay, sorry. But anyway, I say India, waste to wealth. I call this waste to wealth. Waste to wealth package is world best, and we can start from there.
Thank you. Thank you for your thoughts. I think I agree with you. There are things that we know we don't know, and there are things we don't know that we don't know. So there's a long way to go. And I think collaboration is perhaps key. And I want to thank our panel for doing all the great work that you do and for being here with us and sharing your great wisdom and insights. So please join me in thanking them once again.